The Sahara Desert is not an undefined empty space. For the Tuareg, it is a familiar landscape, remembered through routes, stopping points, and signs that only those who live with the desert can recognize. Here, living space is not defined by fixed boundaries, but by repeated movements shaped by seasons, water sources, and the rhythm of community life. Tuareg life is organized around the journey. Caravans connect stopping points, forming a familiar network that stretches across the Sahara, from northern Mali and Niger to present-day Algeria and Libya. These routes are not only essential for survival, but also carry memory, experience, and relationships between different groups.
Bon, faut pas que je te retarde. Je vais poser mon sac.
Each journey is guided by knowledge accumulated over generations: how to read the land, how to anticipate the weather, and how to find water in an environment that is constantly changing. In this context, the idea of home is not tied to a specific place. Home exists in the familiarity of the road, in the ability to navigate open space, and in knowing one's place within a web of relationships. Movement does not mean leaving, it is a natural part of the way life is lived. From this way of organizing life, Tuareg culture takes shape. It does not remain fixed in one location, but moves with people across each stage of the journey. And when culture is lived in motion, the markers of identity cannot rely solely on where one lives. They must be expressed through roles, responsibilities, and the way people are present within a shared journey, opening the next layer of the story. When life is organized around movement, a community cannot rely on place to define identity. For the Tuareg, the question of who is not answered by addresses or land, but by each person's role within the shared journey. For this reason, social markers become especially important, and they are expressed directly through clothing and everyday practices. One of the most recognizable markers is the tagelmust, the face veil worn by Tuareg men. The tagelmust is not worn from childhood. It is associated with adulthood, marking the moment when a man begins to take on clearer social responsibilities within the community.
هذا خروف الشيخ ها مجهد الشيخ هذا شيخ كيفاش
الشيخ ما ناخذ منه اثنين قد
كيف ما فهمتك
قد نقسموا نقلع منه اثنين كيف الغنم ذيك الداخل
انت رومانيا هذه.
Covering the face does not signify concealment or separation, but follows a shared code that expresses dignity, self-control, and social standing within the collective journey. In the open desert, where people encounter one another directly and frequently, this marker helps the community recognize who has entered an adult role and assumed responsibility.
Comme ça. Ça, et après on range. On fait comme ça. Celui-là, j'ai fait 3 tours. Tu vois? Pas comme celui-là. Celui-là, il faisait juste 2,5 mètres. Celui-là, il faisait 6 mètres.
If men's dress is closely tied to movement and the journey, women's roles are linked to stability within that movement. Tuareg women maintain the tent, not only in a physical sense, but in a social one. The tent is the center of daily life, the place where family relationships are sustained, and the space where memory is passed from one generation to the next. When the community moves, the tent may be set up and taken down, but the woman's role in maintaining family life and lineage remains continuous. Within this structure, identity is not defined by who travels farther or who stays longer, but by the role each person holds so that the journey can continue. Men are associated with guiding, protecting, and connecting stages of movement. Women are associated with maintaining living space, family relationships, and collective memory. These roles do not stand in opposition, but complement one another, creating the balance required for a life without fixed settlement. From this perspective, Tuareg identity is not tied to where they are, but to how they participate in the shared journey. Their culture does not reside at a point of origin or a final destination, but in the coordination of roles that allow the community to continue moving and existing. This organization enables culture to live in motion, rather than being fixed to a single place. However, when a culture is built upon movement, it also becomes sensitive to changes in the surrounding world. When familiar routes are no longer as open as before, the question is not only whether movement can continue, but how the roles and relationships that form this identity can be sustained. From here, the story moves into its next layer, where traditional movement encounters new limits set by the modern world. Tuareg life is built around movement. For many generations, familiar journeys have been more than routes for survival. They have formed the foundation for maintaining social roles, community relationships, and cultural identity. However, the world around them continues to change, and these changes gradually affect the very structure of nomadic life. Today, spaces once experienced as continuous are becoming more clearly divided. Administrative borders, new forms of governance, and changing environmental conditions mean that movement no longer follows the familiar patterns of the past. Routes once remembered through experience and collective memory now have to be adjusted to fit new circumstances. This does not mean that Tuareg life has suddenly ended or disappeared. In reality, many communities continue to adapt, finding ways to preserve core practices while adjusting the rhythm of everyday life. Some journeys become shorter, some roles are reorganized, and new forms of daily activity emerge alongside tradition.
Marie, si tu veux, on aime bien jouer Marie.
Si tu veux, on aime bien jouer à la marée.
It is at this point that the most important question arises. When a culture is shaped by movement, what allows it to continue when movement is no longer completely free as before? The answer does not lie in trying to keep everything unchanged, but in the ability to adapt without losing the fundamental principles that have held the community together.
ديالها الصحراء كامل أول بريد.
La première forme de valise du désert.
والله.
Ça c'est une valise.
كانوا يشوفوا ملان ويقول لهم العظم شوف شريتي وعيبتي لي شوف والسمارة وبطيح وجميل.
For the Tuareg, identity has never depended solely on how far they travel or where they stop. It lies in how each individual continues to fulfill their role in relation to others, even as the form of the journey changes. As long as these roles remain recognizable, respected, and passed down, the culture continues to exist, even if it no longer looks exactly the same as before. From this perspective, home is not a fixed point that can be marked on a map. Home exists in shared memory, in the familiarity of relationships, and in the way the community maintains connection even as living conditions change. Culture does not disappear because the world changes, it changes form in order to continue. The story of the Tuareg, therefore, is not one of loss, but of transition. It reminds us that some cultures are not built to remain still, and that their vitality lies in the ability to keep moving along new paths, while still carrying the values that have shaped who they are. More than 2 million Maasai live across the vast savannas of Kenya and Tanzania, places where the horizon stretches without interruption and nature is always fully present. There are no dense forests to hide behind, no towering mountains to cast long shadows, and no dark corners where people can disappear for long. The sun, strong winds, heavy rains, and migrating herds are always right in front of them, impossible to avoid, impossible to postpone. This landscape demands full presence. Every action unfolds under the watchful eyes of the community and the constant gaze of nature itself. On the savanna, there is no room for prolonged hiding, and no silence long enough to escape responsibility. And so, from an early age, the Maasai learn to stand upright, not only in body, but in the way they face life, hardship, and themselves. In the Maasai world, livestock, especially cattle, are not simply property or sources of food. They sit at the center of life itself, forming a bond between people, the land, the climate, and the community.
Hi, Billy. Hey. They stay as a group, very disciplined.
So these are the goats, and this is...
Cattle provide milk, meat, and materials for daily living, but more importantly, they measure a person's honor and capability.
Mom.
A Maasai is not judged by what he owns for himself, but by how well he can care for and protect his herd, especially during seasons of drought and hardship. Wealth is not found in endless accumulation, but in the ability to sustain life beyond one's own. When the cattle are strong, the community is fed. When they weaken, people are forced to reflect on the way they are living. The Maasai live in clusters of homes known as manyatas, low, simple structures built from earth, branches, and dried cow dung. They are not designed to last for decades, but to be taken down and rebuilt whenever the herds need to move. This sense of impermanence is not a sign of lack, but a conscious way of living that follows the rhythm of the savanna.
Cow dung on top.
Yeah, the cow, they cover the cow dung, or they mix it and ash.
Ash and cow dung mixed together.
In water, yeah.
The same.
No, the same family.
Same one, yeah.
My father lived there.
Yeah.
And I live here and my brother.
You live here with your brothers, yeah.
And my
Jivu. Jivu.
So ashes.
Ash. And hapa kuna nini hapa? Store. Oh, this is their store, man. This is crazy. Crazy.
Within this community, no one truly lives only for themselves. Children grow up among the cattle, the sun, the wind, and the repeated tasks of everyday life. From an early age, they learn to read the weather, remember the paths of the herds, and understand that individual survival is always tied to responsibility toward the community. There is no long period of complete protection. Everyone must learn, early on, how to take their place within the shared order. From their living space, their way of making a living, and the structure of their community, a philosophy of life emerges naturally. The Maasai do not seek to control nature, nor do they see the land and sky as something to be conquered or subdued. But they also do not dissolve into nature until they disappear. Instead, they choose to stand within it, keeping enough distance to show respect, yet close enough to accept responsibility. Living on the savannah has taught the Maasai how to stand upright before nature. And from that stance, honor becomes the foundation of everything they will go on to become. Here, no one is born as someone. Identity is not something to be chosen or declared, but something earned, passed through stages, endured through trials, and recognized by the community. Maasai society is organized around a strict age-based order, where each stage of life has clear boundaries. Children, youths, warriors, adults, and elders are not simply divided by age, but by responsibility and by the weight of their voice within the community. No one can skip a stage, and no one can simply leap ahead to a higher position. In this order, personal identity is never self-proclaimed. A person truly becomes only when the community recognizes that he has gone far enough, endured long enough, and lived up to his role. This is what creates a society where the self never stands above the collective order, and where everyone knows exactly where they stand within the flow of the community. In the Maasai world, the human body is not a closed, private space, but part of a larger social order. The bright red cloaks standing out against the savannah are not meant to draw personal attention, but to affirm the presence of the community and signal danger. The colorful beadwork is not decoration, but a visual language that reveals a person's age, role, and position within the group. No one dresses to stand above others. Clothing is not about expressing individuality, but about placing each person in their rightful place. In this way, the body becomes a living social map where every detail carries meaning and information. The spiritual peak of Maasai warrior life is most clearly expressed through the Idoma dance. Men form a circle on the open savanna, and one by one, they step into the center, jumping straight upward under the gaze of everyone around them. There is no stage, no spotlight, no elaborate instruments, only the body, the breath, and complete focus. Adumu is not a competition to see who can jump the highest. The one who earns respect is not the one who outshines others, but the one who maintains calm, control, and self-discipline while all eyes are watching. Jump up, land, then step back into the circle, never holding the center for too long, never seeking to assert the ego. In that moment, honor is not found in being seen, but in knowing when to step forward and when to return to one's place. If living is the foundation, and becoming is a journey granted by the community, then at this point, the Maasai are faced with a question their ancestors never had to answer. What happens when the outside world begins to redefine their value? The savanna where the Maasai live today is no longer the limitless open space it once was. National borders have been drawn, wildlife reserves established, and roads and tourist zones have appeared. Land that was once used flexibly, following the movement of cattle, is now divided, measured, and restricted. A nomadic way of life, built on freedom of movement, becomes increasingly difficult in a world governed by maps and paperwork. The Maasai do not resist change through direct confrontation. But with every meter of land reduced, with every pathway blocked, quiet pressure builds on a way of life shaped across generations. As space changes, the question of identity becomes impossible to ignore. Along with tourism and media, the image of the Maasai has spread across the world: red cloaks, vibrant beadwork, and the Adumu dance performed on the open savanna. But this visibility comes with a paradox. What was once a living part of everyday community life now risks becoming something staged, photographed, and consumed. Rituals that once carried meaning through transition and recognition are sometimes performed more for the camera than for the eyes of the community. Clothing that once functioned as an internal social language is now often seen as a signature look. The Maasai are seen everywhere, but they are not always understood. The most visible clash unfolds in the lives of young Maasai today. Many of them attend school and gain access to technology, new languages, and a modern pace of life. They stand between two value systems. On one side, age-based order, rituals, and responsibility to the community. On the other, individuality, choice, and new opportunities. The question they face is not simply whether to keep or abandon tradition. It is a deeper question: how to change without losing who they are. As the modern world celebrates flexibility and speed, while Maasai culture emphasizes discipline and endurance, tension between these two ways of living becomes almost unavoidable.
Leave, 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 depart, depart.
The Maasai have never asked the world to return to living as they do. Their story is not a call to romanticize the past or reject the present. It simply raises a quiet but persistent question: does the modern world have enough space for ways of living that are different from its own? The Yanomami live in more than 200 autonomous villages along the border between southeastern Venezuela and northern Brazil, in a part of the Amazon rainforest where the boundary between human life and the natural world has never been sharply defined. In these areas, there are no paved roads, power lines, or constant mechanical noise. There is forest, rivers, wind, and people who learn to pay attention to them from the moment they are born. They live in Shabono, large, circular communal houses built from wood and palm leaves, without internal walls or locked doors. Families are not separated from one another, but share a single open space, where people see each other every day, share food, warmth, and daily life, like different parts of the same body. Their mornings do not begin with alarm clocks, but with sunlight filtering through the canopy, the calls of birds, and the smell of cooking fires blending into the humid air of the forest. They hunt when conditions allow, gather what is in season, plant bananas and cassava in rotating cycles, and move on when the soil begins to lose its fertility, allowing the land time to recover without force. There is no concept of long-term accumulation and no idea of permanent ownership. Everything exists in a temporary state, sufficient and balanced. Children grow up within the community, learning to read animal tracks, sense shifts in the wind, and notice changes in the forest before the rain arrives. For the Yanomami, living is not about conquering nature, but about maintaining a fragile yet meaningful relationship with it. They do not ask how much the forest can give, but quietly consider whether humans have taken too much, because if the forest becomes exhausted, they know they will not be able to continue living either. From this way of living, a different way of seeing the world gradually takes shape. The deeper one goes into the daily life of the Yanomami, the more fragile the boundary becomes between what is considered real and unreal. For them, the world is not a flat surface where humans exist separately from nature, but a dense web of invisible connections, where every action leaves an echo that extends far beyond the present moment. Within this perspective, the human body is not understood as flesh and bone alone, but as a meeting point between multiple layers of reality. For this reason, the markings that appear on Yanomami bodies each day are not decorative. They signal a shift in state, a way for individuals to adjust themselves so they do not drift away from the order of the forest. The red pigment, made from urucum seeds, is associated with life, energy, and strength. The black, derived from charcoal and tree resin, evokes darkness, spirit, and aspects of reality that cannot be seen with the naked eye. These markings are applied using fingers, small wooden sticks, or plant fibers, forming simple shapes such as lines, dots, broad areas, or parallel patterns, yet they are never random. The face, chest, shoulders, arms, and legs each hold specific meanings, connected to mental states, roles within the community, or preparation for hunting, rituals, or mourning. Each act of painting represents a different way of being, reflecting inner change and the relationship between the person and the forest. In the Yanomami worldview, the body is not a closed entity, but a place of movement and exchange, where unseen forces are believed to interact with the visible world. The markings help individuals regulate themselves, feel protected, and understand their place within a larger cosmic order. For the Yanomami, the body is not only a means of survival, but a way of expressing one's position within a living world. At the deepest level of the Yanomami worldview, the forest is no longer understood as a space surrounding human life, but as a broader form of awareness, within which humans are only a small and fleeting presence. For them, reality does not end with what the eyes can see or the hands can touch. The physical world is only the surface of a deeper structure, one in which all forms of life coexist across multiple layers of presence. In this understanding, the forest is not silent but attentive, rivers are not merely flowing but carrying memory, the wind is not invisible, but shaped by traces of what has already occurred. The beings the Yanomami refer to as Sapiri are not treated as products of imagination, but as a way of understanding life as something that extends throughout the universe, beyond the boundary between the visible and the unseen. Within this worldview, shamans are not figures of authority, but individuals willing to step beyond the assumption that humans stand apart from everything else. When they inhale yopo, they are not described as seeing visions, but as setting aside familiar ways of perception to enter another state of awareness, one in which the sense of self softens and the boundaries between humans, plants, and spiritual presence become less defined. Sapiri do not appear as supreme deities, but as expressions of a larger order that continually seeks balance. Shamans do not ask for blessings, but listen for warnings. They do not attempt to control the unseen world, but try to understand where human behavior may have fallen out of rhythm with the broader system. For the Yanomami, illness is not understood solely as a physical malfunction, but as a sign that human awareness has become disconnected from the awareness of the forest. When animals disappear or weather patterns become unpredictable, these events are not seen as random, but as consequences of a relationship that has been disturbed. At this point, the question is no longer whether the forest has a spirit, but what happens when humans come to believe that they are the only ones who possess awareness. When we step out of the world of the anomaly, we return to a very different reality, one in which the forest is no longer seen as a living presence, but as a space that can be measured, divided, and utilized. In this reality, trees are calculated in cubic meters of timber, land is valued by its mineral reserves, and rivers become channels for resources serving growth and profit. Everything can be converted into numbers, as long as it delivers efficiency. The modern world does not enter the Amazon rainforest with hostility or malice. It arrives through machinery, permits, and concepts such as development, progress, and necessity. Forests are not cut down because they are hated, but because they stand in the way of economic objectives. Land is excavated not to destroy, but to unlock potential. Rivers carry mercury not because someone intends to poison them, but because the cost of such consequences often falls outside the field of vision of those making decisions. For the anomaly, however, these actions are never invisible or abstract. Each fallen tree represents a disturbance in the order of things. Each change in watercolor signals a damaged connection. Each sound of machinery in the forest is a reminder that the world is slowly losing its ability to listen to the very place that sustains it. What is described by others as environmental impact is experienced by them as a disruption of the forest's balance, a place where life has long been maintained through equilibrium rather than speed. We may not believe that the forest has a spirit. Yet the belief that only humans possess awareness has allowed us to act as if everything else were silent, inert, and expendable. We speak of the future, of growth, of rising numbers, while communities like the Yanomami are gradually disappearing, carrying with them a different understanding of life, one in which humans do not stand above the world, but exist within it. And perhaps the deepest collision lies not in the fact that these two worlds are different, but in the realization that the modern world has forgotten it once belonged to the forest as well, before learning to measure, claim ownership, and turn away from the very source that shaped it. Perhaps the Yanomami will never step into our world. And perhaps they have never needed to. We often ask whether communities like the Yanomami can survive in the future. But maybe the question should be reversed. Can a world that no longer includes people who know how to listen to the forest, who know when to stop, who know how to bow before something greater than themselves, can such a world truly have a future? When this story ends, the Amazon rainforest is still there, quieter, more exhausted, perhaps. And whether or not we believe that the forest has a spirit, it continues to carry the memory of how it has been treated. Some memories need no words. Some consequences do not appear immediately. And some losses are only recognized when there is nothing left to hold on to. The Yanomami do not place themselves outside the world. They simply refuse to stand above it. And it is precisely this quiet refusal that makes them difficult to accept in an age that believes humans have the right to redefine everything that lives. Yet perhaps what they preserve is not an ancient way of life, but something we are slowly losing, the ability to recognize limits, and to accept that not everything exists to be owned. If one day the Amazon rainforest were to fall silent in a way that could never be reversed, that silence would not only mark the disappearance of trees, animals, or the spirits the Yanomami believe in. It would signal the loss of a reminder that humans once knew how to live as part of the world, rather than as outsiders observing and controlling it. And in that moment, we may come to understand that what truly matters is not whether communities like the Yanomami continue to exist, but whether we still have the capacity to relearn how to live without the need to dominate everything around us. The story of the Yanomami does not ask us to return to living in the forest. It offers only a small but difficult question: if the forest is alive, are we still living in a way that respects that life? And when the screen goes dark, when the sounds of the forest fade into silence, perhaps what matters most is not what we have learned about them but what we begin to question about ourselves.